All right, so let's take a look at the server side that we're going to be using. So the server side is listed here, and it's a copy from the file that we gave you for the server implementation that you're currently using. Right now, the server is not doing much. Okay, it's mostly just hosting the test application for us to be able to test whether your database is connected, right? And basically that's it. That's all it's doing, right? And so let's look at the implementation. So the implementation here is that, first of all, it's a file called server.js, right? It's a plain vanilla JavaScript file, right? Now this JavaScript file is meant to be interpreted by a Node.js interpreter, right? Just like you have Java or Python interpreters where you can pass it a Python script or a Java compiled class. At the command line, you say Java and then some class, or Python and then you give it some Python. It's just an interpreter, right? It just executes local files. So let me just demonstrate. If we create here a JavaScript, just hello.js, right, and we code here some really simple JavaScript and just say hello world, right? At the command line, notice that we have here the hello world. There it is, hello world, and I can just execute it from the command line using node hello.js. Notice that it says hello world. Okay, so node is only that. It's just an interpreter of JavaScript that allows you to execute JavaScript from the command line. Okay, so you can execute it on the from the terminal, from a server, right, from a machine, as opposed to executing JavaScript on the browser. Right, when we think of JavaScript, we immediately think, oh, this code is executing on a browser. Yes, well, Node.js just allows you to execute it on a machine, right, from the command line. So what you gain here is that all the things that you could not do in a browser, now you can do in a desktop. For instance, in a browser, you don't have access to the file system, right? You don't have access to a database, right? You don't have access to storing things in a long-term session, okay? You have limited access to the network, right? Because of security circumstances. Here on the server, you don't have any of those restrictions that you have on the browser, right? You can connect to anywhere in the network. Right, you can have access to the file system. You can store things in the file, read things from the file, connect to any database you want. Right, you don't have any of those restrictions. Right, but the inverse is true. On the client, you have a user interface. Right, you have dialogues. You can interact with the user. You can draw. You have all sorts of user interface access. You have access to the DOM. Right, you can interact with the browser. Whereas on the server, you don't have any user interface. Right, you cannot interact with the user. There's no pop-up, any dialogue. Everything would be through the console. Yes. So actually, they complement each other very nicely, right? The client side will take care of all the user interface and interaction with the end user, but it will have to rely on the server side of this application to actually store anything permanently, or access to the file system, or do any heavyweight logic, any business logic, or access heavyweight network connectivity. Make sense? Right. So to that end, the server.js here is again, it's a plain vanilla JavaScript file, but it's like any framework. Any framework all by itself is not very interesting. Java all by itself is not very interesting. Right. .NET is not very interesting until you start looking at all the libraries, right, that make up that framework. Right. That the community has made available, and make it an exciting reason for using that particular framework, right? And Node.js has a very vibrant community that has made available lots of open source, very useful libraries, right? That we can make use of them. Yes. In particular, we have the Express library. The Express library allows you to very simply in a couple lines of code create a running server, right, that can listen for incoming requests. Okay, so here we are using Node.js's keyword require, right? That it's Node.js's implementation of the module data design pattern, that you can create self-contained JavaScript modules, right, that have their own little namespaces, and allows you to divvy up and break up applications into large applications into smaller little modules, right? So here we are loading the module express, right, that has been already pre-installed. So requires the equivalent of import, right, or include in other frameworks. Yes? So here we are requiring the express library, and we are instantiating it here. We're creating a new instance of the express library, and this app is the instance of that library that we're going to be using to be able to create servers, be able to respond to HTTP requests that come in, any posts, any gets, any puts, any deletes that come in from the browser. That's our app here is going to allow us to do that. Okay. Then here we have a couple other things. The body parser is going to allow us to do what it says: parse incoming data coming from the client. The client is going to be sending us JSON, raw JSON data as part of the HTTP body, right? Arrays or JSON objects. We need to be able to parse it from the body, right? All by itself, Express doesn't know how to do that, right? It knows how to parse the URL. It knows how to parse query strings, path parameters. It knows how to do that out of the box, right? But out of the box, it doesn't know how to parse the body as a JSON content from the body. And it's because, the body can have all sorts of things, right? You can have images, files. You can be uploading all sorts of things, different MIME types, yes? So out of the box, Express doesn't know how to parse these different data types, all these different MIME types, yes? So body parser allows to extend the Express library to be able to extract JSON from the body. Then we have HTTP. It's going to allow us to create HTTP servers. Okay, here we are initializing the body parser. We're telling Express to parse the body for JSON. We're telling it, hey, there's going to be lots of JSON coming back and forth. I want to turn on that feature, right, of parsing a JSON from the URL. We're also turning on cores. So cores, it's its own topic. The browsers have a restricted, for security purposes, browsers are only meant to be able to make requests, right, from JavaScript running on the browser. They're only allowed to make HTTP requests from the server that they were downloaded from. Okay, for instance, the JavaScript that is going to be hosted on our servers is going to be downloaded from our server. It's going to run on the browser, right? The browser, if that JavaScript tries to connect to generate any HTTP requests, okay, the browser is going to stop it and says, wait a minute, who are you trying to connect? Right, and because your JavaScript was downloaded from this particular server, from this particular domain, yes, and it's going to restrict that JavaScript, telling it that you can only make requests back from where you came from, right? Because presumably the person is visiting the website, presumably they trust that website, right? So anything that is downloaded from that website, presumably we trust any of the any interactions with that website, and we implicitly are giving it permission to go back and talk to the original domain. Yes? But the browser stops the JavaScripts from making connections to other domains, okay, for security purposes, right? We call that cross-origin requests, right? So we do not allow JavaScripts to go across domains, right? Only back to the original domain. And this has been in place from day one, way back when JavaScript just came out. And all browsers, most modern browsers enforce this security rule. Okay, but lately, because so many APIs have been made available today, providing lots of really nice data out there, this restriction is now not allowing browsers to be able to go fetch images from Google and songs from Spotify or movies from IMDb. It's making it way too restrictive, right? That JavaScript that runs on the browser is too restricted that it can't go fetch any data unless it goes through the server first. Right? It's very restrictive. So what modern solutions to this is to use with this technology, this technique called CORS, right? That cross-origin request that allows browsers to ask the servers and say, hey, this JavaScript is trying to, I downloaded it from this domain, but it's trying to connect to Spotify, or it's trying to connect to Yelp or IMDb. Okay, instead of just stopping it, let me go ask Yelp. Hey Yelp, are you okay with this JavaScript asking you for this data? And if Yelp comes back saying, sure, I don't care. I'm okay with providing data for restaurants and whatever, right? And so if the server says it's okay, then the browser is going to say, well, Yelp said okay, go ahead, you can talk to Yelp. Yes. So newer servers, right? Like Apache, I think Apache 7 and above, and newer versions of Node.js and WebLogic and AWS. They're all supporting this new standard, the CORS standard, right? Where they can specify where, what are they going to accept, right? What kind of requests are they going to accept, right? Here, star means I don't care who comes to me. I will accept anything, right? I don't care from where they come. I will provide them with data. So the browsers are going to come to me and says, hey, somebody's asking for the list of websites for so-and-so user, right? From some other domain. Yes, not from my server, from some other domain. I say, sure, here are the list of websites. Okay, because that's the data I have, right? And these are the pages and the widgets and whatnot. Yes? So Google, or most Google APIs, most Yelp or Spotify, most of them support CORS. Some older APIs do not support CORS, right? I suggest when you look for APIs out there, right, that you look for APIs that already support CORS. Right? If they do not support CORS, you're going to be restricted on what kind of communication you can communicate with them, right? You're going to have your browser go back to your server, and then your server is going to have to go out and fetch the data, right? It's what we call implementing a proxy, right? Implementing a server proxy. It's just more inconvenient, right? Some APIs require you to do that, right? That it has to be a proxy server, not from a browser. Okay. Anyway, let's see. We also here we are saying that we're going to be listening at port 3100. Here's where we actually implement the server. Okay. And here is where we have. This is actually we're going to implement that today. We don't have that today, and we're going to listen for port 3100. Okay, everybody okay? Yes.
At the very beginning, when you were doing the imports, how can you use bar for express?
Oh, I'm just going to use it right here. I didn't want to put it in the global space. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a good practice to always declare your variables. Yep. As opposed to const maybe? Oh, it could have been a const. Yes. Let's see. All right. So if we can run this from the terminal, and this would be a node server. Okay. Right now, the server is not doing much, and if we go and try to communicate through 3100. Right, it's coming back saying, you're asking for the root. There's nothing mapped to the root. Right? I don't know what to give you. Right? There's nothing. Nobody's handling that HTTP request. Right? So let's stop the server and create something that is listening to that. We can say app.get, and we can say, oh, I'm going to be listening to slash. I'm going to be listening to slash, and what do I want to do? I want to execute the following function. Right? I am mapping a URL to an executable action. Okay? So if I have get here, I'm going to have a console log root context handler. Okay, so this hello from root context, and let's restart the server. Okay, if I refresh, it's not doing anything, but notice that it printed to the console. Right? Notice that the browser is still waiting. See that it's looping, right? It still is waiting for the request. I sent a request. The server never responded. Okay, and the browser is just going to stay there waiting for the server to come back with a response, right? Because we're still implementing this server client cycle, request response cycle, until the browser just gets sick of waiting and it'll time out, right, and say, oh, there's nothing there. All right, eventually it'll time out. Okay. Right. So to participate in the request response lifecycle, we can define here request response, right, where the request is going to capture everything that has to do with the request, right? So it represents everything that the browser sent us. Okay, maybe a timestamp when the request was generated, the IP address of the machine where the request came, right? Any parameters that it passed, any cookies that the browser might want to share with us, any URL parameters, any query strings, anything that's coming from the client, wherever this is coming from. Yes? Whereas the response is going to allow us to respond to this, right? Programmatically respond. So for now, we're going to ignore the request. Instead, we're going to respond. Instead of logging, we're going to say respond, and we're going to send back this piece of text. All right? And let's restart the server. Let's restart the server. Okay? And so I'm now, notice that it timed out, right? The browser got sick of me. And notice that it kind of was waiting for me to refresh and immediately went out and says, ooh, it responded. It came back with that response. Hello from root context handler. Make sense? Everybody okay? So this, in effect, I have created a web service endpoint, right? And whose URL of that endpoint is the root, right? Now, typically we understand the root usually mapped to some default content, right? Usually some index page, right? That is the root hello world or landing page for a website. Yes? So to distinguish and say, hey, I'm going to leave alone the root because I know it has a special meaning, right? Instead, I'm going to say that my beginning, all the URLs that I want to deal with, right? They're all going to start with this /API, and we're all going to agree here, right? As a convention, that anything that deals with data, right? They're all going to start with /API, right? With dynamic content, but we're going to be spitting out some dynamic content. So here, for instance, if I want to say hello, I can still just return the text. Let's restart this. Right, I refresh, and if we want that context, it would be /APIs/hello, and that comes back with the same text. Make sense? So again, this is to protect the normal interpretation of URLs. The normal interpretation of URLs is that they map to some static content, some HTML, some CSS, some JavaScript. Yes, right, but here I want to leave that interpretation alone and just all agree that we are going to map our dynamic content to /API. Everybody okay? All right. So here we're sending back just plain old text, right? What we want to be able to do is not just plain old text. I like to be able to respond with dynamic data, right? Where this might look like this: a message, hello from handler. Okay. And if we refresh, we restart. Right, and I've refreshed, notice that the browser now has interpreted this as appropriately as a JSON object as opposed to just static content, right? Static, it came in the same, it's just ASCII. Both of them are ASCII, yes? But the MIME type is different, right? It's application JSON as opposed to just plain old text, right? And the browser has correctly interpreted as JSON, okay? What we want to be able to do is our Angular application be able to query and ask for users, for websites, for pages, for widgets, right? Using this technique, right? Where we're going to have URLs that map to different contents, different data types, users, websites, pages, widgets, right? Those are all the domain objects for our domain, right? For our implementation. That makes sense, all right? Now, typically this syntax, I find it disturbing, right? Where you have here a function call and you have an embedded anonymous function, right? Embedded inside of the function call. Yes? So, you know, especially me coming from Java, I find this syntax disturbing. So instead, I think it's much easier to read if you declare the function separately, right? Give it a name, maybe hello, and then refer to it in the call. I think that's much easier to read, right? And I ask you in your assignment to please follow this naming convention, right? It's so much easier to read like this. And this just behaves the same way. Let me restart the server. Okay, and this just behaves exactly the same way. Everybody okay? All right. One more thing is that notice that I'm starting the server from the command line, right? I don't want you to start things from the command line, right? Instead, I'm asking you to please create a run configuration, right? From WebStorm or whatever IDE you're using. Hopefully using WebStorm. You'll create a new Node.js instance and say that you want to execute the server.js file. Yes? Right? And you'll say apply, you say okay, you give it a name, maybe server, you say okay. Right? And now you can run it from here as opposed to from the command line. Right? So this would behave exactly the same way. It's running and I still have it running. Everybody okay? So what this buys you is that obviously you can stop it, but you can also run it in debug mode, right? You can put breakpoints. You can put a breakpoint here, right? And you can run it. Okay, so that if I reload my page, notice that it hits my breakpoint on the server. See that? Right, so if I see that you don't have a run configuration and you come ask for help, the TAs and myself, usually it means that you're not debugging, you're not using the debugger, and you're not putting that much effort at trying to find problems on your own before coming to us for help. Okay? So please create a run configuration and make sure you start debugging and stepping through the code on the server. Not only in the client, but also on the server. Yes? All right. Let me stop that. Okay. So usually we want to leave the server.js all by itself, right? We don't want to implement everything on the server side on the server.js, right? Instead, we want to put that in a separate little module so we can split our application into small little modules. All right. So I'm going to show you with this a very simple example on how to move this out of this file into a separate JavaScript file that can then be loaded from here. Yes. So what we're going to do is that we're going to cut it from here. And instead, I'm going to create a separate file. I'm going to call it JavaScript hello.js. Oops. Do I have already hello.js? I do. Why do I have a hello? Oh, yes, we did. Here it is. Yeah, so here I'm going to paste my content. Yes? All right, now, for this to work, I need an instance of app, which I don't have. Right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to wrap this in a function where we can pass app as an argument. Yes? So we're going to wrap this in a function where app we have as an argument, as a parameter. I'm going to put this all in that function. All right, and we're going to call it, this could be an anonymous function in a minute. All right? And now to be able to access this function, I would like to be able to pass it from where? Well, server is where app lives, right? That's where we instantiated it. There it is. I like to be able to pass it, right? So to be able to do that, we're going to use this same mechanism, these same two lines. We're going to use something similar. We're going to load the hello.js file by name. Now, then when we have it, we're going to pass it the app. All right, so let's do that. So I'm going to load hello from here, var hello. I'm going to require the hello file, hello, there it is, right? The hello, the .js in require is optional, right? It's implied, right? It's a JavaScript file. Okay, so you don't have to provide it. Now that I have hello, I can call it and pass it the app. Yes? Now, for the require to work, this hello file has to be written in a particular syntax. It has to be a function, right? Well, not necessarily. Because I want to pass it values, it has to be a function. Right? It has to be a function. But to expose it so that it can be required from the outside world, right? It needs to export this function so that it can be included elsewhere. Yes? Right? Very similar to the way we do Angular, and we say export, right? And then we give it the class name. Similarly, right? This is Node's implementation of the module design pattern. Angular has its own, right? And Java has its own, and .NET has its own. Each framework has its own way of implementing modular, reusable code, right? So the way we do it here is we use the module keyword and then exports, and we say equal. Anything that we assign to module.exports can then be required elsewhere. Yes? Right? In this case, I am exporting the whole function. Right? So when I require this hello, it's that function. Yes? Well, it's a constructor, and we can just pass it. I can call that function. So this hello is that function. Everybody okay? Right? And we're calling it, passing it hello, the app instance. Everybody okay? Right? So now, right, I can now restart the server. Let me actually, just to make sure, to prove that this is indeed a brand new, we can restart the server. I always say that yes, always restop and rerun. So if we refresh, notice that it actually returns the 1, 2, 3. Yes? So we have successfully created a little module, right, that listens for hello, API hello. Everybody okay? Awesome. Now let's focus on what we need for the assignment. All right? So okay, let's do that next.